Welcome back to Access. I'm Ken.
And I'm Nicole.
And today we do Axe.
Woohoo!
I'm excied. Whenever I think axe, I think like a big metal,
like an axe.
like an actual axe, AX. But but no one else thinks that way.
No, there's not a lot of bloodshed in this book.
No, there isn't, is there?
No, a nice change from the Old Testament.
I suppose that's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's not Acts, but Acts. Is that better?
Acts of the Apostles.
Exactly. So just as a gospel tells the life story of Jesus and normally his birth to his crucifixion, death, and resurrection, the books of Acts, the book of Acts here tells the life story of the church. So it's the start of the church, and then as it gets roaring. Acts is the second volume of Luke. So they're written to the same person, the language and style all match up. And so the reason why there's a book in between, the Gospel of John, is they like to put all the Gospels together. So they kind of separate this two-volume work, but it will help you to, when you read Acts, to realize that, Luke is the first volume. And Paul, interestingly enough, the way Acts shapes the life of Paul starts to look a lot like the life of Jesus at the end with all the trials and whatnot. So there's some literary shaping going on that echoes Luke, and that'll help you understand it. Like Luke, it's written about between 70 and 90 AD, so it's certainly not one of the earlier books, but not one of the later ones either. Trying to think what else I want to say. I think the main thing that you'll notice with the book is how much arguing and diversity there is. Sometimes I get this sense out of church people, out of us, that man, don't you miss the good old days when the church used to agree. We used to have unity, and now we argue about. I hate arguing. We fight all the time. The book of Acts is great because you realize that pretty much since the word go, Christians have had a hard time agreeing on almost anything.
Yeah.
And so what you see is little communities, that pop up like mushrooms that, have different views. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think it's because we care so deeply about these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very much so.
Yeah, this isn't, it's not carpet color, that the book of Acts is fighting, but, can somebody become part of the church who isn't following the law when everyone else has followed the law? These are big deal issues.
Yeah, and really, how important was Jesus? I think that's kind of the central question. What did he change? What did he leave the same from Judaism? And since it was written post-70 AD, so remember, that's the fall of the Second Temple. And when Christianity and Judaism are really becoming distinct from one another, this is a hugely important book for understanding that.
Why don't we get to the themes, Nicole?
Okay. Well, the themes are the founding of the church, basically how missionary efforts start, I guess would be a good way to say it. And in that, it's, who do we preach to? Who do we allow in? Is this just a Jewish thing? Is this like a Jewish renewal? A new direction for Judaism? Or is this open to Gentiles as well? And I feel like that's the real tension in the book, is who's included, who's not.
And it's really it's the big tension in the early church.
Yeah.
And in some degree, we'll talk about this later, but it is the same tension that we struggle with today. Is who's allowed.
Who's a part of this covenant.
Yeah.
And the covenant language comes back. Ooh, covenant.
Nicole's favorite.
Just when you thought you were done, it comes back. That's why we talk about it a lot in the Old Testament.
That's right.
Because the theme of the New Testament.
Back.
It never leaves us.
No.
Much like the covenant itself. And so who's included, who's not. You get the ministry of Peter in the first half of the book. And then you get some tension with Peter and Paul. And then the second half.
Where does Mary factor into all of that? Peter and Paul.
I believe she left on a jet plane.
Pursued by a magic dragon.
Yeah. I'm not sure when she'll be back again.
It's really hot outside, we should mention, and my brain's not
I know.
working so good.
I have
So, so you got Peter and then Paul.
And they're kind of two different ways. They have two different ways of looking at ministry. Where Peter really feels a call to preach to the Jews, and has a hard time wrapping his brain around the idea that Gentiles can be part of this too. Whereas Paul really opens up for the Gentiles.
Crazy.
Yeah. And where he sees himself as the apostle to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really interesting to see how like different people who are just as faithful can have totally different takes on what really essential questions mean.
Yeah.
And they're both being faithful to how they understand it. And that's why church is so hard.
Yeah.
It's because it's good people doing things that they think is right. But we can't all agree on what is right. And so those would...
Awesome.
Do you have any themes to add?
No, I think that's perfect.
Okay.
Well, why don't you hit us off with the first great story of Acts, which is the founding of the church.
This always reminds me of like Out of the Whirlwind and Job.
Yeah.
So Peter and the other apostles are doing their thing. They're preaching like Jesus told them to. And then the Spirit of the Lord in the form of fire comes down on them. And they're in a big city. Where are they?
They're in Jerusalem.
They're in Jerusalem.
They're actually shut up at this point out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So they should be out there, and they're just like...
Yeah. And the Spirit of the Lord comes, and when they preach, everyone hears it in their own language. And remember that Jerusalem is like a metropolis. There's people from all different areas. It's a huge trade center. So everyone hears it in their own language, which is crazy.
Well, this is like the best text to give if you don't like somebody in church, and you say, "Hey, I'd like for you to read," and then you give them this one because you've got like Pamphylians.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's like Poofala, blah blah blah. So if I ask you to read on Pentecost, you're like, oh.
It's a little bit worse than a genealogy, like on the names that you have to pronounce, which is why I'm not reading it. But they speak in tongues. This is where tongues comes from.
Well, there are two versions of tongues, and this is the first one. We'll get to the second one in 1 Corinthians. But this is the one where when they speak, they actually speak a real language.
Right.
It's just not theirs. So it'd be like if Nicole or I started whipping out some German. Nicole, could you whip out some German? Or
what do you want me to say?
The cheese is old and moldy.
Der Casa ist old and moldy.
It's like the spirit's here.
We do have German speakers in our congregation.
That is true. That is true.
In Schoeningen.
Yeah, but so it's not like the tongues that you'll hear about in 1 Corinthians
are different.
It's like an unintelligible blah, 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 kind of thing going on. So very different.
This reminds me of like being in the UN where everyone's got the headphones.
Yes.
And it's automatically interpreted into their own language. That's what it's like.
It is. I always wondered how that works, but
I don't know. Holy Spirit in the wires? He's everywhere.
He's everywhere you want to be.
It's just like Visa or American Express. Okay, so this is really the birth of the church. It's what we kind of point to as the opening up of the covenant, because it's very explicit that people who are not Jews are understanding and converting. It's like 5,000 people convert that day after hearing this. It's where we get the celebration of Pentecost, 5 tongues. Yeah.
And Pentecost was a Jewish festival that had already been going on, and then we kind of take it over. And when you hear Pentecost in the church, it's the birth of the church. And it used to be everybody would wear red or something like that.
Yeah, I got
cutesy things.
People commented on the fact that I did not wear red this year, and I was like, I didn't know I was supposed to.
Yeah, there's a little rule.